So now that you've looked at the video on the leadership theories that have been developed over the past several decades, and you've also completed your readings, let's talk about how one goes about developing a leadership philosophy for oneself or an organization. Michael Maccabee and his colleagues identify four elements that they think are very important in developing a leadership philosophy in an organization. First of all, identifying the purpose of the organization, clearly identifying why are we in business? What is it that's important that we do? And then what ethical and moral reasoning determines the key decisions that we make? This really goes back almost to undergraduate philosophy class where you really need to think about what are the ethics involved that are very important in all the key decisions that we make as an organization. And then thirdly, what practical values or core values do we need to practice to achieve this purpose? So what are those underlying values? And then fourth, how do we define goals and results that are consistent with the purpose and the values? If the three of those are not consistent, it just doesn't work. And I'm sure you've all been in organizations where they're not consistent. So first, let's talk about purpose of the organization. The purpose describes where and why a leader is leading an organization. And for example, the purpose or the mission of Seattle University is dedicated to educating the whole person, to professional formation, and to empowering leaders for a just and humane world. So we purposefully weave curriculum into undergraduate education that looks across the spectrum of developing values and so forth through theology and philosophy classes to promoting critical thinking. Our new core curriculum looks across at all of these things, including quantitative and qualitative reasoning, and then weaves leadership throughout the curriculum. So we keep looking back at that purpose and asking ourselves, are we creating leaders for a just and humane world? Does that value of social justice run through the curriculum so that we can support our purpose? It needs to be a powerful statement that is meaningful to all stakeholders. And so not just the people who work within an organization or the leader, him or herself, but of course all the people that the organization is serving, the customers, the patients, and so forth. Your book says that many organizations use mission to describe the purpose, but they feel like purpose is a little bit more powerful word or more explicit with what really needs to be stated. Why are we in the business that we're in? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And I would agree with that statement. Levels of moral reasoning refer to that sort of moral compass that guides the decision making for organizations or for individuals. You might say that Wall Street has not followed a very high level of moral reasoning over the last decade and may even be at the lowest level in many respects, and many corporations as well, looking at following rules only when an authority is watching or when they might be audited or something. I'll again talk about Seattle University because it's an organization that I know fairly well. We'd of course like to think that we're functioning at level 3 and that we're not just looking at the people that work here and the students that we serve, but we're looking at the neighborhood around us, with particularly with our youth initiative and all the service learning that we do, and also our sustainability. We very quietly banned bottled water from campus about half a dozen years ago, and each of our buildings is considered to be green now. We've moved steadily toward that goal over the last several years. In last week's module, Valda talked about the triple aim in healthcare, and there's something called the triple bottom line in business, where many business now are trying not to just look at the profit making at the bottom of their income statement, but they're also looking at the effect that they have on social welfare in the community and also the environment. And so when I look at the levels of moral reasoning here, where a broader definition is really looking at the common good and what benefits or at least doesn't harm all of those people that might be affected by your actions and decisions as an organization or as a purpose or as a person, I really think about the triple bottom line, and that you really look at the broader sense when making those tough decisions and what are the values that drive those decisions. Practical values to me are those core values that really have helped the organization achieve the overarching purpose. If the values are not congruent with the behaviors within the organization, you are not going to achieve the purpose. For example, if I used to work at an organization, a big hospital in Connecticut, where the statement was that we want to participate in continual quality improvement. We want people to speak up if they make an error. We want people to be able to stop the line, so to speak, like the Toyota philosophy. And yet the organization was quite punitive toward anybody who did make an error. So there was quite a bit of fear around admitting that one made an error, that something went wrong, because a whole pile of bricks would come down on you, and it was reflected not only in the reaction of senior leadership, but performance reviews. So there was a real gap there, and then the organization wasn't able to achieve its purpose. I think it's also extremely important that as you examine your own core beliefs for your leadership philosophy, that you look at the organization where you're working or where you'd like to work and ask yourself if they're congruent. Is it a match? I found that in that organization in Connecticut that there was a big gap between my own core values and those that were really being lived within the organization, and I came to the realization that I needed to leave, and that was a good decision for me. So having that congruence really helps an organization and ourselves achieve whatever the purpose is that we've set out for ourselves or the organization. I think that quite often we perform surveys and so forth with patients and our own staff to see how are we doing, but do we really look at the gaps? And your book proposes doing a gap analysis around practical values, which I think is a great idea. So how important is this value for achieving the organization's overarching purpose? And then how well are we actually doing? So sometimes we look at how well we're practicing this by surveying patients and staff and so forth, but do we match that up with how important is this particular value? That's something that takes a lot of time and effort, and I quite often see missing from an analysis done by an organization. What I think is actually more difficult is to do this for oneself. Where's the gap with myself in terms of open communication and collaboration? It's very difficult to look at our own behaviors and ask ourselves, how are we stacking up? What I think is more useful and a little scary, but if you can do it, it's very beneficial, is to ask colleagues to rate how close we are. Where do they see the gaps? And many organizations do this with a 360 kind of evaluation. So as you're looking at your own leadership philosophy and you look at where the gaps are, a very difficult task to do, you might ask trusted colleagues where they think some of your gaps are in the values that you stress are very important for yourself. So your book has a good example of a purpose and how that relates to outcomes and so forth from the Cherokee Nation Health System. The Cherokee Nation Health System protects and promotes health and is the provider of choice through its workforce and then and in the delivery of a quality experience to those we serve while practicing good stewardship, resulting in a happy and healthy Cherokee people. Then, unlike several other organizations, the Cherokee Nation Health System actually breaks apart their purpose statement into pieces and relates each of these to outcome measures. So for Protects and Promotes Health, they look at immunization rates, unadjusted raw mortality, childhood obesity, morbidity, on down through workforce, delivery of quality of care. For that, they're looking at the number of canceled appointments, adverse incidents. So they're really looking deeply at what their patients report to them, all the way down to a happy and healthy Cherokee people, where they look at a quality of life index and disability associated life years. So they're actually taking that purpose and applying it to the outcomes that are most important to them. And then if they're not achieving them, they're looking back at the behaviors and values and how are those played out in the workplace? Why are they not achieving what it is they want to achieve? Which is what we're going to be looking at in another couple of weeks when we look at quality improvement measures. And then finally, in looking at the article that you read this week on the Ignatian approach to leadership, I'm hoping that you can use this also as a guide to developing your own leadership philosophy by, again, knowing your own values and using self-reflection to discern what are the most important values to you that really lay the foundation for your philosophy. And that perhaps one of those values might be an ability to adapt in a changing world. So having that that flexibility and ingenuity to lead the way in healthcare as it's rapidly changing. And then creating an environment that helps others to succeed is, of course, an important cornerstone of Ignatian leadership. And finally, helping to shape that future by cultivating creative thinking. So back to our philosophy of Seattle University about creating leaders for a just and humane world, which I know all of you are. So thank you for listening to me ramble on over this PowerPoint. I hope you enjoyed it.